Under the glare of halogen floodlights, the naval base pulsed with energy. Forklifts rolled across the tarmac, engines growling. Personnel moved in rapid bursts between command tents and transport rigs. A drone cradle hissed as its payload arm released. The dull thud echoing across the operations pad. Overhead, a formation of fast attack subs shimmered under tarp as teams prepped them for water insertion. Inside the main hangar, the mission board flickered to life in real time, displaying call signs, equipment rosters, and the rising tide chart for the harbor breach op. Leah stood near the edge of the comms table, a clipboard balanced flat across one forearm. She wore a slate-gray contractor jacket with a stitched patch reading Contractor, Systems Shoreline. The badge hung slightly crooked off her belt, rain-specked, ignored. Around her, voices rang out in steady rhythm, coded jargon exchanged by naval analysts, tech liaisons, and senior officers with rapid confidence. They moved with a tempo reserved for those who had never been asked to slow down. She shifted her weight slightly as a voice near the head of the table barked out another sequence. Zone 3, clearance confirms clean thermal exit. Overwatch Team Bravo launching at 0500 sharp. Someone nodded and repeated it back, already typing. A few chairs squeaked as the brief shifted toward deployment rotations. Leah raised her hand halfway, just enough to draw a glance from the systems lead 2 seats down. There's a shallow drift line near the south jetty that might still trigger passive sonar if they push too close, she said, her voice measured, not loud. The systems lead didn't pause. His eyes flicked toward her, then moved on. A lieutenant across the table leaned back in his chair with a grin. "Surf reports in," he said. "Thanks. Malibu." The room chuckled lightly. Someone tapped the table twice, a lazy drum roll. No one looked at Leah directly after that. The board shifted to the next priority. Leah didn't speak again. She didn't frown. She simply folded the paper back against the clipboard and adjusted the edge with her thumb. The folder tucked under her arm marked with custom current overlays and wave refraction modeling remained closed. No one asked to see it. Around her, the operation escalated in pace. Jet crews jogged past the open bay doors, black boots streaked with salt and sand. Engineers climbed into rigging harnesses to double-check hatch seals on unmanned submersibles. A pair of officers reviewed thermal lens calibration from a side monitor, nodding as readings confirmed optimal visibility. Everything gleamed under the urgency of precision and performance. Her name was not on the manifest. She checked once, as the sheets were printed and stacked at the mission entry table. She stood behind the logistics officer without interrupting. The names scrolled alphabetically, printed crisp in black ink. Teams Alpha through Delta, primary breach, secondary clearance, Overwatch. Not one line read Leah. She turned away before the sheet finished printing. Outside, the wind picked up. A large amphibious transport vehicle rumbled across the far end of the pad, water spraying from its wheels. Inside the command tent, a senior liaison shouted across to another station, "Tag everything above 100.0 kilograms for secondary airlift." "We're not wasting bay slots on shoreline cargo." The term was casual, impersonal. Leah's badge hung beside her hip, catching the edge of light as she turned. She made her way toward the staging area quietly, checking one of the tidal sensor consoles she had been assigned earlier that morning. The unit had logged stable pings for the last 6 hours, but she reviewed the time-stamped pulse intervals by hand. Her fingers moved quickly, adjusting the dial to display the latest depth trend. A younger operations tech walked by without slowing down. "Support shouldn't have opinions," he muttered, not even looking in her direction. The comment was swallowed by the rush of a passing generator cart. Leah didn't respond. She reset the console's faceplate and stood, brushing a line of grit from her cuff. In the prep tent, final checks were underway. Tactical suits were cinched. Waterproof markers were clicked open across laminated maps. A large screen displayed the harbor grid, each vessel tagged with colored overlays. Leah stood just outside the flap, watching. Her analysis folder was still in her hands, edges slightly frayed. She knew which ships had modified hull grooves. She had already modeled the current spread around their keel lines. No one had asked. The briefing had ended 20 minutes earlier. A civilian press liaison with mirrored sunglasses strolled by, laughing with one of the drone pilots. He nodded toward the support crew area. They still have the shoreline girl holding a clipboard. The drone pilot glanced over and shrugged. As long as she doesn't swim out there herself. I don't care. Leah didn't flinch. She stepped away from the flap and moved back toward the staging crates. A technician nearby flipped through a checklist and called out component tags without looking up. Mag seal confirmed. Latch integrity holds under low pressure. Reinforce bay 14 and tag for ride-along. She stood quietly near the secondary line of crates. Her breath had the same rhythm it always did, steady, silent, unremarked. Her folder was never opened. Her badge was never scanned. Her name was never read aloud. And yet, as the elite unit lifted off, engines rising in perfect choreography, not one of them noticed that the tide was shifting just past the jetty. The blind spot she had mentioned, the one they had laughed off, was already folding under the pressure of the incoming current. She had seen it coming. She always did. The folder in her hand bent slightly as she gripped it tighter, the edges flaring with the wind. No one noticed. No one ever did. The sound of the mission filled the sky. Her silence was still the only thing that held. Leah's quarters sat at the end of the auxiliary row, behind the primary barracks, where the corridor lighting dimmed into a constant low hum, and no one passed through unless they were assigned there. The space was barely wider than the length of a cot, but it was clean, organized, and quiet. A metal rack held 2 folded shirts, both field issue. A mesh shelf contained her tools, a sealed gear roll, and one worn paperback that hadn't been opened in weeks. The only light came from a clamp lamp angled down over her desk, illuminating the wall in soft yellow. Pinned above her workspace were laminated wave charts, marked in pencil and wax crayon. Some bore salt stains from long-forgotten use. Others were fresh printouts annotated in neat, even handwriting. She had drawn a red circle around the harbor's southern edge, where a line of sonar buoys failed to cover a shallow drift gap. It was the same zone she had mentioned earlier that day, the one dismissed with a joke. Below it, she had taped a thin strip of acetate over the tide graph, layering in a surge pattern based on the moon phase and barometric pressure. Her overlay was more detailed than anything on the official screens. She sat with one leg tucked beneath her and ran the tide simulation again, watching as the current pulse bent against the hull contours of 3 ships moored inside the private docking bay. The software was hers, built from open-source code and rewritten with custom parameters. No one had approved it. No one even knew she had it. The display stuttered slightly, then recalibrated as she adjusted the drag coefficients by hand. She watched in silence as the drift vectors shifted. Her breath didn't change. Next to the terminal sat her gear. A blacked-out wetsuit, seams double-sewn and sealed with neoprene tape, lay folded with its name patch stripped. She had blacked it out with permanent ink, not because she needed to hide, but because she didn't want to be seen in the wrong way. Her paddleboard was padded with sound-dampening foam, the type usually used to line the inside of drone canisters. She had shaved it into a curve that would slip cleanly under the harbor's wave profile. On the tail edge, she had wrapped black tape over the reflective fin decals. There could be no light. She leaned forward and pulled up a split-screen thermal overlay. The dock patrol's infrared field reached only to the edge of the intake pumps. She had already memorized the patrol rotation 2-minute passes, staggered by wind drift. She would have 6 windows. That would be enough. A small photo frame sat beside the corner of the desk, face down. She didn't touch it. Instead, she reached into the side pocket of her pack and drew out a coil of flippers, black as the wetsuit, rigged to be silent. No creak, no snap, no backflow resistance. Her hands moved without hesitation. Every item had been checked, tested, rechecked. There would be no room for noise. As she worked, a memory returned, not sharp, not dramatic, but quiet. She had been 8 years old, floating in the shallows of a training cove off Coronado, her mother's voice echoing from the rocks. The lesson wasn't about swimming fast. It was about holding still. Underwater stillness is louder than splashing, her mother had said, crouched beside her with a mask pulled up on her forehead. You hold the water like breath, not like muscle. Leah had stayed motionless for 1 full minute. Eyes wide open. Sand brushing past her ankles. Later that same week, her mother had taken her out during low tide to navigate by moonlight. She had shown her how to move without creating surface trail. Back at the desk, Leah unrolled a narrow length of waterproof tape and sealed the final strap on her gear. She tucked the excess away with precision. The tablet blinked softly beside her, still displaying the simulation. The current had shifted 1 more degree toward the eastern break. She didn't adjust it. She had already accounted for that change 3 days ago. From the rack beside the cot, she pulled a small fabric pouch. Inside were 2 things, a packet of thermal gauze and a folded scrap of lined paper. She smoothed the paper flat on the desk but did not read it. Instead, she knelt by her bunk, lifted the frame panel beneath the mattress and tucked the note inside the hollow space beneath the slats. It would remain there. It didn't need to be found. She replaced the frame, stood, and looked once at the sealed gear bag leaning by the foot of her cot. She didn't tell anyone what she had planned. There was no authorization, no timestamp, no logged protocol. She didn't type it into a mission docket. She didn't write it on a requisition slip or ask for clearance through the back channel. Outside, wind moved faintly through the corridor vents. The walls of her quarters creaked once with the pressure shift. Somewhere far above, a drone launched. It made no difference to her. She was already prepared. The water would welcome her. The tide did not care who had rank. She closed the simulation window, shut the tablet lid, and clipped it against her chest rig. Every part of her had moved in silence, and every part would stay that way. This was not disobedience. This was clarity. She was not alone. She was unseen. And that was exactly what the harbor needed. In the command tent, energy cracked like static between antenna towers. The wall screens displayed a dozen overlapping feeds, each marked with coordinates, timestamps, and blinking icons. Technicians barked updates over one another, headsets crackling. 2 officers in matching utility vests tapped furiously at a flight board covered in red and green magnets. The countdown on the master screen glowed just above the mission timer, ticking steadily toward 0. Someone in the back raised a fist and shouted, 10 seconds to launch. All eyes up. Drones lit their rotors on the forward pad, a synchronized row of blinking lights rising in a staggered wave. From above, they looked like sparks climbing off a bonfire. Across the bay, submersible teams slid their craft into the breakers, comms chiming as signatures confirmed green. Overwatch called out weather updates in bursts, each transmission clipped and polished. The cadence was practiced, efficient, triumphant. Behind the lead table, Commander Reeves adjusted his collar and leaned into the main mic. All sectors report ready. Push Phase 1. Confirm drone grid active. The operator beside him gave a nod, then launched the sequence. On screen, a wide-angle feed showed the harbor's surface flat, dark, and deceptively calm. Confirmed clean visuals. Someone reported no anomalies, all quiet on the shoreline. Another officer nearby chuckled and added, unless our paddleboard girl decided to get ambitious. That drew a laugh from a few techs. Leah's absence wasn't strange to them. She wasn't listed on any rotation. No one had seen her since diagnostics were finalized. The general assumption was that she was off patching a buoy or calibrating sensor logs for data they didn't need. She had spoken once during the brief, but no one remembered what she said. Whatever it was had been lost in the noise of tactical chatter and launch prep. The shoreline was not quiet. 300 meters away, beneath the curve of a jagged seawall, Leah moved through knee-high surf with practiced restraint. Her paddleboard glided beside her, partially submerged, its underside covered in matte tape to kill reflection. She moved with one hand on the rear edge, keeping it steady, letting the wave action help rather than hinder. Her wetsuit was slick and dark, no insignia, no name, no trace of military origin. The board bore no tag. Her face remained calm, her eyes half-lidded under a low hood. The wind pushed faintly across the harbor mouth. Her breathing was timed to it. Each inhale matched the tempo of the swell. She had memorized the pitch of the breaker set against the stone. She did not look toward the command tent. It wouldn't matter if she did. The harbor entrance had a net array. Not a physical gate, but a web of low-range sonar buoys spread in a U-pattern. The drones sweeping above only monitored surface activity. They did not track current drift beneath half a meter. The mission designers had calculated from above. They had trusted visual clearance, perimeter signatures, known shipping paths. They hadn't accounted for what the current did when the moon sat low and the wind tilted west. Leah reached the first buoy without breaking pace. Her board rocked once against her thigh as she ducked beneath the sensor beam, slipping into the crease where tide surged just enough to create acoustic distortion. She held her breath for 3 full seconds, eyes open underwater, palms trailing against barnacled stone. Above her, a drone passed in a slow curve. Its camera swept past her position and kept going. Inside the command tent, cheers rang out as all 5 forward subs reported full clearance. Someone shouted, "Picture perfect, Phase 2 already locked." The senior analyst leaned back and cracked his knuckles. "Easiest breach brief in 6 months. If the tide keeps like this, we're on time down to the second." Leah pulled herself into the harbor proper, board sliding forward as she kept close to the hull of a retired customs vessel moored just off the inlet. She didn't look up. Her hands were already working. A waterproof pouch opened under her ribs. She withdrew the first tag. It was round, slightly larger than a coin, coated in carbon fiber. She pressed it to the ship's hull, 2 fingers flat. A soft vibration confirmed the adhesion. The water barely moved around her. The noise of the drones and subs continued overhead. None of it touched her. She moved on to the next gap, timing her approach with the churn from a circulating pump outlet. The noise masked her approach. Another tag planted, then another, each one placed in silence, each one invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Her board bumped gently against her side. She reached down once to steady it, adjusting the anchor line so it wouldn't drift past the patrol boundary. Every motion was measured, nothing wasted. She passed under a dock beam, ducking behind a rusted supply crate that had been bolted into position and forgotten. The patrol team that usually passed that corner was on a reroute tonight. She had known that. She had mapped it days ago. Inside the tent, the senior controller tapped a new log line onto the manifest. All tagged units confirmed. Demolition schedule locked. We've got control. No one noticed the column of unassigned IDs. No one noticed the gap in the infrared return. No one thought to ask about the foam trail near the seawall, already vanished into tide. Leah slipped beneath a support strut and kicked into deeper water. Her board followed on the line. Silent. Loyal. The current shifted just slightly as she moved past the last marker. She had not spoken. She had not signaled. She had not asked. And still, the harbor was no longer theirs. The water inside the harbor basin held a strange quiet, the kind that only came in tide slack when everything slowed just enough to unsettle the surface. Leah floated chest-deep between 2 anchored hulls, her board tethered to a rusted cleat by a line no thicker than surgical thread. The vessels loomed on either side of her, black and angular, their undersides mottled with barnacle scars and sun-faded sealant. Between them, the water turned darker, denser, with traces of oil streaking the top in thin, iridescent bands. She moved with care. Every breath passed through her rebreather in a slow exhale, bubbling just under the threshold of sound. Her left shoulder grazed the edge of a steel rib as she pushed forward, paint flaking against the neoprene of her suit. The scrape left a smear of rust on her sleeve, but she didn't look down. The first marker waited in the pouch, strapped across her lower back, wedged in foam to protect the pressure sensor. She reached the correct point by feel, pressing her palm against the belly of the nearest hull until she felt the change in texture. This was the weld line. She had memorized the patchwork of maintenance scars from satellite images and dockside inspection files no one had read in full. Her fingers located the seam. She reached over her shoulder, retrieved the marker, and pressed it flat against the hull. The magnetic lock clicked softly under the current. She counted to 3. It held. She drifted backward, adjusting the board line so it wouldn't tug. Then she swam low, beneath the radius of the navigation light and the security beam that blinked green from the dock pile above. The space was tighter now, between the next 2 vessels. There was barely room to move without brushing metal. Her shoulders turned slightly as she twisted to pass through, exhaling a narrow stream of air to reduce buoyancy. The second hull was newer. She could tell by the sharp edge of the rudder fin and the way the trim tab was still coated in factory paint. This one had not been scanned. It wasn't on the public registry. She had found it listed under a shell company through a customs slip, buried 3 pages deep in a forgotten cargo log. That meant it mattered. She reached for the next marker, this one wrapped in a slipcase lined with a thermal screen. She aligned it with a cluster of sensor ports built into the ship's belly, staying just beneath the activation range. Her tether wrapped around a crossbeam to anchor her position as the tide began to shift. Pulling faintly to the left, she didn't fight it. Her legs remained motionless. She pressed the second marker against the metal. This one clicked slower, its adhesive slightly misaligned. She adjusted by rotating the seal edge with her thumb, counting under her breath. A patrol light shimmered through the surface just above. She froze, fingers on the marker, and waited. The beam passed. She gave the marker one last firm press and slid away, staying parallel with the waterline. The sound of the harbor was muted here, broken only by the hum of generator pumps echoing through steel. Her breath remained steady. Her eyes flicked upward once, then down again. The third ship sat farther out, just beyond the old dry dock frame, angled against the wind. It wasn't listed anywhere. She had found it only because she had traced the electrical draw on the outer mooring post. The numbers hadn't matched the known traffic. It had power. That made it relevant. She moved quickly now, but without panic. Each stroke of her arms was controlled. Her rebreather hissed faintly. Her board remained behind, anchored, silent. The final ship bore a partial Navy seal near the aft end. It had been painted over, but not well. The shape was unmistakable. It was shorter than the others, bulkier, with added struts under the midsection that weren't part of any standard model. Her stomach tightened as she reached the keel. Just ahead, tucked beneath a camouflaged arch, was a drone cradle. She hesitated. For the first time, her hand wavered. This was not a target she had confirmed in any official file. If the cradle was operational, the tag might trigger a secondary lock or data transmission. She exhaled once, slow, and reached anyway. The third marker came free from her hip pocket. She placed it to the rear of the cradle, away from the support struts, in a dead zone between frame cross points. The metal felt colder here. She paused with her hand still against the hull, holding the marker in place as her fingers absorbed the tremor of an internal pump cycling on. Her hand shook once, then stopped. She counted again, slow, mouth closed. 1, 2, 3. The lock engaged. She backed away, spinning into a slow descent, letting the negative buoyancy pull her down. The current took her diagonally toward the harbor's edge. Patrol lights skimmed the surface behind her. A mechanical whine passed overhead, likely a hover drone repositioning. She did not look up. Instead, she angled toward the outflow tunnel built beneath the maintenance deck. The tunnel was lined with algae and waste residue, but it was quiet. No sensors. Just one tight bend and a narrow gap barely wider than her shoulders. She pushed through, scraping one elbow, her foot catching once on a pipe bracket. Then she was through. The water opened beyond the tunnel, darker now, colder. She pulled herself along the wall, breath returning to baseline. Her board waited where she left it, drifting in a gentle arc. She grabbed the tether, looped it over her wrist, and kicked out toward the sonar gate. She waited for the tide to shift again. 2 more minutes. That would give her the exit window. She floated silently beside the wall, eyes half-lidded, listening to the pressure beneath the harbor swell. She had done it. No fanfare, no record, no shadow trace, only 3 markers, perfectly placed. The water moved around her. She did not resist. Her discipline held. She did not smile. She did not speak. She just slipped back beneath the gate, into open sea, where no one had ever expected her to be. Under a canopy of stable stars, the harbor looked frozen in its own reflection. On the monitors inside the command tent, everything held steady. The thermal feeds showed no movement across the shoreline grid. Drone sweeps came back clean. Hull tags glowed green. The mission screen declared full clearance. One of the analysts leaned back with his boots half off the floor and said, "Wrap phase 3. That's a clean finish." Commander Reeves nodded, arms crossed as he watched the central feed. A freighter bobbed gently near the dock's end, its wake minor, insignificant. The man beside him scrolled through comm logs, all pings confirmed. Demo team locked and staged, no unplanned signals. A junior officer added, "No thermal shifts either. Still water all across the south wall." Then the vibration started. At first, it didn't look like movement, just a faint shimmer in the upper corner of the freighter's profile, as if the light bent wrong on the camera. Then came the sound, not an explosion, not even a crack. A low, submerged groan, like steel flexing under pressure. A second later, the ship listed. A third of its hull dipped unnaturally left. A spurt of dark water burst from its lower vent, shooting 10 feet into the air. The room froze. Someone muttered, "That's not ours." The second ship jolted. Another groan. This one tipped back, a sudden tilt that revealed its lower frame, where water poured out from beneath. A chain of bubbles rose to the surface and popped violently. The screen camera zoomed. No scorch marks, no impact flare, just internal failure. "Run the demo log," someone shouted. "Check the pre-planted markers. Confirm all are intact." "They are," came the reply, voice rising. "We never triggered them." The switch is still off. A third vessel, a smaller skiff moored closer to the wall, shifted hard. The bow cracked against a mooring pile. A rapid breach along its mid-hull vented an invisible pressure pocket. The spray knocked loose the dock light. Sparks flickered over the surface before being drowned by foam. Commander Reeves stepped forward. Who greenlit that hull activation? His voice was sharp, restrained, not yet panicked. Was that Demo Protocol 5? "No, sir," someone said. "No orders logged, no one engaged the system." Then who did it? The room went quiet for half a second. Fingers clicked across keyboards. A technician squinted at the feed, toggled infrared, then thermal, then sonar. The readings were clean, too clean. A voice from the back said, "Sub-team didn't plant in that section. We didn't get that far. We were pulled for drift offset." Overwatch, Reeves asked. They saw nothing. Visuals never showed contact. No swimmers, no IR disruption. Nothing moved. Another officer stepped in from the outer trailer, holding a tablet with feed frames stacked side by side. This was 2 minutes before the first breach. He said, "Watch the bottom right." They all looked. The feed showed a portion of the seawall bathed in moonlight. The water moved slightly, nothing abnormal. Then a faint outline curved across the surf, a shape, dark, low, narrow, gone in seconds. No tag, no heat signature, no metadata. Pause, someone whispered. They stared at the still frame. The shape was just outside the perimeter of the grid. No drone had swept that low. No alert had gone off. The shape was real, but unregistered. "Who is that?" the analyst asked. No one answered. Commander Reeves looked at the manifest. No name accounted for the breach vector. The demolition team had not deployed. The subcrew had not engaged. The demo switch on the console remained untouched, its light still a steady yellow. The blinking red alarm above the screen began to flash, not a detonation warning an integrity alert. The software had logged an unscheduled breach 3 times, all within 90 seconds. Across the room, the communications operator stared at the panel. No one had access to that placement. He said, "We would have seen it. That's a ghost tag." Another screen refreshed. A technician highlighted a telemetry blip. "We had contact. 1 blip. Low echo. Then gone." They scanned the logs. Nothing matched. No scheduled swim team. No drone cradle entry. No named insertion. Only a single frame. That faint blur. A ripple where silence had moved. No one spoke her name. But every face in the tent had turned. Every voice now hung back. The confidence had drained out of the air. What had been laughter earlier was gone, replaced with the kind of tension only quiet leaves behind. The breach had come. It had not asked, and it had left no signature behind. The sky turned from slate to soft amber as the first edge of sunrise pushed over the eastern ridgeline. At the far end of the service dock, where the gravel gave way to sand, Leah dragged her paddleboard through the last curl of surf. One fin was torn. Her wetsuit was soaked through, slick with salt and grit. The tether line hung loose in her hand. She didn't look up as she crossed the shoreline. Her breathing remained steady. The main base was already stirring. Crew vehicles rumbled near the launch pads. An officer in a pressed uniform strode past her without pausing. Another technician jogging toward the command tent glanced once, confused, then kept going. Her name tag was gone. Her gloves, soaked and heavy, were looped through her belt. She walked barefoot across the tarmac, each step quiet, deliberate. No one called her. No one asked. Inside the tent, the replay feed ran again. 3 ships breaching in sequence. No trace of the cause. No registered team responsible. An officer muttered near the console, "That wasn't our team." Another voice, lower, replied, "She was never on the board." The room stayed still after that. No laughter. Just the sound of keys tapping slower than usual. Leah passed behind the tent line and stepped into a narrow strip of shadow beside the seawall. Her board rested beside her. No markings left. She knelt down, unfastened her rebreather, and folded the rig without a word. The surf came in quietly behind her. She didn't check the horizon. She had already marked the next tide in her head. A new entry appeared in the mission log later that hour. Redacted, unsigned. One line read, "Confirmed neutralization, unknown actor, non-scheduled ingress." No one claimed it. No one erased it either. She sat with her back against the concrete, her towel folded over one knee. The water crept in again, exactly as she had measured it. No one approached her. No command was given. The silence had returned, but this time it held weight. She watched the tide roll up over the same gravel she had crossed. No eyes were on her, but she didn't need them. Her work was done. Her presence had already been recorded where it mattered most, in the gap between what they planned and what actually happened. She stayed until the sun touched her boots. Then she stood, picked up her gear, and walked away. She was never named in the mission brief, never logged in the action report, but she was there. While others talked and postured and launched their plans into the dark, she moved beneath it all, calm, prepared, and unseen. What they dismissed as background turned out to be the reason everything shifted. Not because she asked for attention, but because she understood the tide better than anyone else. This was not about proving herself. It was about doing what needed to be done, even when no one was watching. Her strength was quiet. Her confidence earned through patience, not praise. She showed that true power does not have to announce itself. If this story spoke to something you carry quietly too, take a moment to share your thoughts below. And if you believe in the strength of stillness, follow along for more stories like this. Stories of presence, purpose, and quiet defiance.